American nation state. So the American liberal democratic free capitalist system is the last product of universal reasoning. There's no, can we deduce any alternative? They always overlook the Lakou system and the African model because, you know, Africans aren't that sophisticated. There's no way they could have came up with a model that's better than this. Or how do we integrate this? Kojève did argue that both the communist model as embodied in the Soviet Union is similar to the American model. But Fukuyama will argue the American model is the last model. So the aim should be for America to go around the world and reproduce the model. By any means necessary. By any means necessary, which is what we've been trying to do. But since the 1970s, we've done so by trying to integrate those who've been marginalized. So this fight over identity politics, everybody is fighting identity politics. Let's get some gay rich people, some black rich people, etc. into the liberal democratic free capitalist model because there's no alternative. You all, can you deduce an alternative?
I disagree that they've tried to integrate the identity politics. I think they've tokenism a few, so that there's some, see, it's not us, it's you.
It's you. It's you, of course. Pull yourself up by a bootstrap.
Or close the door after I came in as an immigrant.
But it still begs the question, okay, let's assume it's tokenism. It still begs the question, is the liberal, democratic, free capitalist model the most just form by which we ought to organize society? Mother Nature doesn't think so.
The capitalism is economic.
Well, it's one and the same. They both come out of classical liberalism. Adam Smith is still a liberalist. This notion of free rational men constituting a society based on reason.
Based on free rational men?
Yes, of course, of course. What's the difference with women?
No, free rational men in control and power is what is being sold.
So the alternative is free rational women?
No.
Oh, what's the alternative?
A non-capitalist society.
And how do we constitute and integrate that?
That's the problem no one wants to solve.
Well, Mother Nature will force us to. So it's not even survival of the fittest, it's either survive or die. Because we cannot, capitalism is based on this notion that economic growth, or the liberal model is based on ever-increasing economic growth, Reaganomics, supply-side economics, will trickle down to the masses, and everyone will rise, right? But there's a limit to growth. There's a limit to our resources.
And it's never trickled down.
And it never trickles down in constant pollution.
And if we destroy everything in order to make that product to sell, once everybody owns the product and there's no environment, we're all stuck with nothing.
Now you have to understand, the economic side is tied to the political side. Why? The political side, you need free rational people to sell their labor power within free capitalism. You all understand? So human rights and equality are ideologies to protect the masses within capitalist society. You all understand that? You are free, only free enough to sell your labor power. You have freedom to, but you don't have freedom from, right? Freedom from poverty, freedom from sickness. You just have freedom to speak, freedom to assemble. They don't care about that. They have ideological apparatuses to prevent you from revolting against the system. Police is one way of looking at it. But the problem is, how do we conceive of a just society? Because right now you're caught into the dialectic. Should we focus on human rights and equality to perpetuate capitalist development, because that's what the right is saying. Forget the identity politics. I want the best man, woman, whatever for the job. Universal human rights, universal equality. Or should we focus on getting those who've been marginalized into capitalist organization? So the politics and the economics are one and the same. It comes out of our classical liberal philosophy of we are rational human beings that can deduce universal values by which to recursively reorganize and reproduce our existence for the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Yes, ma'am.
Doctor, I understand that there is an issue with the type of government that you would like in Haiti, but I also understand that whenever there is corruption, I think that no type of government is going to work. I remember when there was an earthquake there, and there was a lot of money collected, and the money was given to the Haitian authority, the Haitian government, and somehow that money disappeared and nothing much was done.
That's the struggle. It begs the question again. How do we constitute, what does a just society looks like? Is liberal democratic capitalism a just form by which we ought to organize our society? Because that's the model that they've been trying to implement in Haiti since the American occupation. Forget the American, since 1801. And to some extent, you all believe, to some extent, that, yeah, if I work harder than some, I should be able to have more wealth than the other. Why? Why not? Is that the most just form by which we ought to recursively organize? That's the answer we're facing contemporarily. Should we simply focus on the identity politics where we give freedom to a few, integrate a few at the expense of their masses into this structure? Or do we have to rid us of all of this structure altogether? That's the question. Should we destroy liberal democratic capitalism? Or should we simply try to integrate as many people as possible into liberal democratic capitalism? That's the question we're facing. On top of climate change and global warming.
I hope what I'm about to say makes sense, but I feel like it becomes an issue because those that have the potential to make a change, that say have the power to do that, I feel like they're just afraid to. Exactly.
Well, that's true too. Marx argued that for Marx, it goes back to the question, how do we bring about the change? And this is the model that Lenin would constitute or institute, the dictatorship of the proletariat. Should it just be a group of the intelligentsia class that tells the masses, this is messed up, let's try to implement something else? Lenin calls it the dictatorship of the proletariat.
Who's grading what intelligence is?
And not only that, but our media makes everything looks like a dictatorship. You're not giving the truth. Theodore Adorno argued that Walt Disney is the most dangerous man in America. And he uses it as a metaphor to explain that the media is the most dangerous ideological apparatus in America. In his book, Manufacturing Consent, Noam Chomsky talks about how 5 corporations own the media that you consume. And they dictate to you what is right, who is wrong, who is not. I believe George Bush, Barack Hussein Obama, they're war criminals. Why aren't we prosecuting them as war criminals? They invaded a country, several countries. They killed a sitting president. We have international law. This is what Chomsky, when we're using deontological ethics, why are you doing to people what you wouldn't want done to yourself? By the standards we use on other countries, George Bush, Obama are war criminals. They violated international law. They should be brought in front of the Hague, prosecuted, and lynched.
Not necessarily. Prosecuted, yes.
Death penalty. When I say lynch, is a metaphor for the death penalty, because that's what we give all the other leaders around the world.
Maybe they should be sentenced to serve.
You know, it could be. Well, I'm a materialist, so I do believe in the death penalty.
We gotta walk the plank.
Yeah. They're war criminals. Hillary Clinton is a war criminal. So why don't we hold the same standards to them? Does might make right? These are questions. I'm going to be gone in a couple of, in maybe 10 years, I don't know. But you're the generation that have to pose these questions because we're facing as a species death with climate change. We have to change the way we reorganize our lives. Either that, don't worry about having children.
We all need Teslas.
No, we don't. In fact, they're worse. They're in the Congo just tearing up the Congo to build their cars. And your cell phone. Go ahead, man.
Just to backtrack a little bit, I'm a firm believer in our past as a vehicle for teaching us how to move forward in the future. So I agree to a large extent with the liberal democratic capitalism. Mm-hmm. However, where the left and the right is integrated, I think everyone has the ultimate goal of universal human rights and equality. However, based on what our past has taught us, I think that is where the left comes in, where you now have to be forced to integrate based on race, based on gender, based on sexuality, because when we, back 100 years, 200 years, we had the opportunity to pursue universal human rights and equality, and we did not do that. So now we have to force ourselves to integrate based on race, to integrate based on sexuality, and to integrate on other basic standings, identity politics, so that further down the line, the laws that we had to put in will be null and void because they'll come naturally.
Okay.
We'll all just be equal. And I think that's the ultimate pursuit, to all be equal. However, if you, based on what we've seen 100 years ago, when you have that opportunity, you don't take advantage of it. You're not actually equal. So you have to, a society has to be forced to be equal so that 50 years and 100 years, equality will come naturally.
Okay. Now, cool. But that is taking place at the expense of what's called structural differentiation. You're integrating for universal rights and equality at the expense of what Marx called the ever-increasing proletarianization of the masses. While you're integrating people into your human rights and equality, the poor are getting poorer, and what's happening to the rich? 1% of the population owns 67% of the world's wealth. That's insane. If your parent, you're more likely the class you're born in, that's the class you're going to die in. So, while you're talking the game of integration, you're also paradoxically differentiating people. So, let me ask you a question. 2008, we're facing an economic crisis. Bush is out, Obama gets in, right? Based on free market capitalism, once you get into business, if your enterprise fails, by the logic of free market capitalism, what should happen to your business? You should go out of business. So why would Obama bail, and I'm going to use me anecdotally as an example. When 2008, my wife and I were married, what, a year, maybe 2? We owned our home. JP Morgan Chase had the mortgage to our home. They were losing money. Why wouldn't Obama bail me and my wife out as opposed to bailing JP Morgan Chase out? Or AIG, I'm sorry, AIG owned our home. Why didn't they give us an economic surplus? Why did they give the AIG? They made a rational decision. They should have failed, right? So why would you perpetuate class structural differentiation? Had Obama given my wife and I, let's say, $100,000, I would have paid off my mortgage and spent the money, right? So why give it to AIG? Too big to fail? What does that mean? Rich white men aren't allowed to fail, but poor Negroes like myself are?
I think the rationalization had more to do with unemployment. But
Well, that's the logic.
I think capitalism has become synonymous with trickle-down economics. And I don't think it's necessarily one of the same. I think capitalism has the prospects of being profitable or being forward-thinking or forward-moving. However, I don't necessarily agree with trickle-down economics. So
You're confusing. Well, Noam Chomsky has this thing that America is not a free capitalist society. It's actually a socialist state. Because, but we've never had anything, quote unquote, free market anything. You see what I'm saying? We've never had free market capitalism. Well, that means clock's over.
They've got 5 minutes.
Oh,
so
I'm sorry. I apologize. But there's never been free market anything. But the problem is, capitalism leads to structural differentiation. It's not contingently so, it's necessarily so. Because why? The problem becomes those who own the means of production, the only thing you have to sell is your labor power. You see what I'm saying? Do you own the means of production? So you're constantly working for somebody else who does. So it